Excuse me. Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to Unspoken Horror. Okay, this is the new detectives.
A deadly house fire in Boise, Idaho claims the lives of a father and his two young stepchildren. As investigators sift through the ashes for answers, they uncover evidence that the blaze was no accident. In Northern California, a man is reported missing, and all indications suggest a tragic accident is to blame. But a routine investigation soon exposes a web of deception, fraud, and possibly murder. When money is at stake, some predators will stop at nothing to exploit another's trust. But even the most complex schemes can't survive the scrutiny of those determined to find justice for victims who have been fatally betrayed. Nestled in the western foothills of the Rocky Mountains, Ada County, Idaho is home to the state capital of Boise. It is also home to some 400,000 residents who work, live, and play here. In the pre-dawn hours of February 10th, 1992, emergency dispatchers received a 911 call. A man reported that his house, a two-story duplex, was on fire, and he believed the family of four who shared the house was still trapped inside. Within minutes, firefighters and emergency units from the surrounding area responded to the call. Fire and smoke consumed the duplex. Firefighters struggled to bring the first floor blaze under control. Rescue workers fought their way through the flames and thick smoke to see if anyone had been trapped inside. In a second floor bedroom, they discovered a man lying motionless on the bed. A young girl was found on the floor a few feet away. As the search continued, firefighters recovered the body of a young boy in a nearby bedroom. All of the victims were rushed outside for treatment. But despite the rescue workers' efforts, all three were pronounced dead at the scene. The man who lived in the separate residence inside the duplex told police that around 4 a.m. he was awakened by his smoke alarm. He tried to wake up the other family, but got no response. He identified the victims as 34-year-old Randy Rowe and his two stepchildren. He didn't know the whereabouts of the children's mother, Robin Rowe, who also lived at the residence. Then, two women arrived at the scene. One identified herself as Robin Rowe. Visibly shaken by the news, emergency workers escorted the young mother away from the house. Her friend, Joan McHugh, told police that Robin had fallen asleep at her house earlier that evening. Robin had awakened her just a short while earlier and wanted to return home. She had a premonition that something bad had happened to her family. All of the victims' bodies were removed from the scene and transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. Now, Fire Marshal Doug McGrew began looking for clues to tell him how and why the fire started.
We started looking into the ignition source of the fire by doing, like we do on all fires, we do an exterior walk around of the building. We look and see where the least damage is. We go there, and we start working towards the areas where the most damage occurred. Once we get into that area, then we start digging down through and layering through the debris and trying to determine exactly what ignited the fire.
Almost immediately, investigators made a strange discovery. The circuit breaker that controlled power to the family's smoke alarm was in the off position. But that did little to explain how the fire started. And because the damage was so extensive, finding those answers would take time. Within hours, autopsies were performed on Randy Rowe and the two children. The medical examiner found lethal amounts of soot and carbon monoxide in each of the victims' lungs and mucous membranes. He concluded that all three had died as a result of smoke inhalation caused by the fire. As the search for the fire's cause continued into the morning hours, arson investigators sifting through the ashes made a troubling find. On the carpet and in a charred pile of laundry, they discovered burn patterns suggesting a flammable liquid had been poured over the area. And the spot was just inches away from vents that circulate air throughout the residence. Investigators collected several pieces of the charred remains for further analysis. All indications were pointing to arson. And that suggested that the fire that had claimed the lives of the two young children and their stepfather had been intentionally set. To find out, State Fire Marshal Don Dillard delivered the charred samples collected from the house to the Idaho State Police Crime Lab, located in Pocatello. By comparing a burned sample believed to contain an accelerant to one that was untouched by the fire, he hoped criminologists could find answers.
What I've asked our criminologists to do is to compare the two, what we feel the one to be evidence, and then the one that we feel probably doesn't have any kind of an accelerant on it. And she compares those two, and by doing that, hopefully comes to the conclusion that there either is or isn't an accelerant involved in the case.
Forensic examiner Susan Williamson began testing the samples for the presence of an ignitable liquid. First, Williamson inserts a strip of charcoal ribbon in the sealed cans that contain the charred samples. Then, the can is placed in a chamber and heated for several hours. If any flammable substance is present, the heat will turn it into vapor, which will then be absorbed by the charcoal strip. Once the evidence has been heated, the charcoal strip is removed from the can. To transform any trapped vapors back into a liquid, solvents are then added to the strip. The resulting liquid is then subjected to sophisticated detection equipment that measures for the presence of known flammable substances. When the process was completed, Williamson analyzed the results.
One of the samples contained an ignitable liquid. And in this case, I identified an heavy petroleum distillate. And heavy petroleum distillates include things like kerosene, number two, and number one, diesel fuel and fuel, heating fuel oil and so forth.
The analysis had exposed the deadly fire as an act of arson. And more disturbing, it had exposed a triple homicide. Forensic examiners had exposed a house fire in Ada County, Idaho, that had claimed 3 lives as a triple murder. The findings were passed on to homicide investigators. Looking for answers, detectives turned to Robin Rowe, the wife and mother of the 3 victims. When asked why she wasn't at the residence on the night of the fire, Robin explained she had been staying at her friend's house. Over the past few months, her marriage had been falling apart. In fact, Robin believed that her husband Randy might have intentionally set the deadly fire. She said that recently, Randy had become increasingly abusive toward her. The smallest things would set him off, and he couldn't seem to control his anger, even in front of the children. Robin claimed that on one occasion, Randy had struck her so hard she was forced to go to the hospital. Several hours before the fire, Randy had called her at her friend's house and demanded that she come home. When she refused, he threatened that she would never see him or her children again. Though it appeared Randy Rowe had made good on his threats, the story troubled veteran detective Gary Rainey.
Any parent is protective over their children, and had he been this abusive parent, any reasonable spouse would have wanted to remove the kids from that situation. Her story was that he was only abusive with her and not with the kids. That's not the norm, and certainly in law enforcement, we recognize that abusive personality, that violent personality, the anger control problems, is not going to just be focused on one particular person, especially with those pre-teen age kids who sometimes anger parents pretty easily.
With their suspicions raised, police wanted to learn more about the Rose marriage and corroborate Robin's alibi.
Okay, so
they began with Joan McHugh, the woman who had been with Robin at the time of the fire.
Well, there were some abuse problems.
Because of Randy's abuse, Robin, she said, had been staying with her. That night, Robin had fallen asleep on her couch around 11 p.m.
And then,
Joan went to bed a short while later and never heard anything to suggest Robin ever left the apartment. Joan had no doubt that Robin was a victim of domestic violence.
And she said that it had been going on for quite a while, but she had never said anything to anyone. And it just seemed to escalate over a period of, I don't know, about 4 or 5 weeks. And a few times she came here, 10 or 11 o'clock with the children, because they were escaping from Randy.
The information gave Robin Rowe a solid alibi for the time of the 3 deaths. And the result of the forensic analysis had made it plausible that Randy Rowe had in fact killed himself and his 2 stepchildren in a vengeful act of rage. But that theory would not go unchallenged.
I learned that there had been some domestic violence going on. But then as a couple other people called, I learned that there wasn't domestic violence going on according to them. So it just started not adding up very well.
To learn more, police brought in Randy Rowe's sister to answer questions.
Any signs that Robin or the kids were the victims of any kind of violence, any bruises by anybody?
She didn't believe that Robin was the victim of domestic violence, as she had portrayed herself to be.
Never any discussion.
Though Randy and Robin had begun to fight more and more, he was not a violent person. The kids were Randy's life. His sister knew that he never would have harmed them. And according to the sister, Robin treated Randy as little more than her kid's babysitter, result, Randy talked openly about the possibility of divorce. But he loved the children as if they were his own. And the kids made it clear that they didn't want Randy to go.
The children had, at one time, reportedly told Robin that they wanted to stay with Randy and not go with her. And of course, they were Robin's natural children and not Randy's.
To resolve all of the conflicting information about the couple, investigators decided to take a closer look into Robin Rowe's background. What they found was shocking. According to records, Robin had tragically lost a son nearly 15 years earlier. Her 6-year-old boy had died in a suspicious fire at her California home. Arson investigators were never able to determine a cause of the fire. But for Idaho police, the similarities between the tragedies had to be more than coincidental. Robin Rowe was now emerging as the prime suspect in the deaths of her husband and 2 children. But with an airtight alibi and no obvious motive to explain such an unthinkable crime, police knew that proving it would not be easy. Police in Ada County, Idaho, struggled to find answers in a deadly house fire that had claimed 3 lives. Robin Rowe, the wife and mother of the victims, had an airtight alibi for the night of the murders. But all of the evidence was pointing to her as the prime suspect. What investigators needed was proof. Looking for potential clues, they began reviewing statements made by Robin's friends and family. They found that one friend had stated that a few days prior to the fire, Robin had mentioned that she had rented a storage unit and had taken some of her belongings there. The timing of the rental was too close to the murders for police to ignore. Detective Gary Rainey followed up on the lead. Soon, he was able to locate the unit that Robin had rented. With a warrant in hand, investigators were dispatched to the storage unit. There, they found boxes of personal papers belonging to Robin. Among the items was an envelope filled with several $100s in cash and bingo receipts from the YWCA where Robin Rowe worked. Police also collected several life insurance policies taken out on Robin Rowe's husband and her 2 children. Robin was listed as the sole beneficiary on all of the policies, and she stood to gain more than $275,000 from the 3 deaths. It was powerful circumstantial evidence of murder.
One of the most disturbing facts being that she took out the last 2 policies. She already had multiple policies, but Robin took out the last 2 policies on the children January 24th, and the fire was February 10th.
Still, it wasn't enough to take Robin Rowe into custody. Police began interviewing Robin's co-workers at the YWCA. The manager was surprised to learn that cash and receipts had been found in the storage facility. Robin had reported that proceeds from the Y's last bingo game had been destroyed in the house fire that killed her family. Though authorities lacked hard physical evidence of murder, they now had proof of embezzlement. The prime suspect in the triple homicide investigation was placed under arrest and charged with grand theft. But police were a long way from proving that Robin Rowe was a cold-blooded killer. Hoping to generate a lead that could destroy her alibi, details of the crime were released through the media. A short while later, police got a tip. A local newspaper delivery man called and told police that he remembered something unusual on the night of the fire. He said that while making deliveries around 4 a.m. that morning, he saw a car driving away from the duplex. He wasn't sure of the make of the car, but he described it as a late model four-door with rectangular taillights. Detective Ken Smith asked the delivery man to come down to the station.
We had, prior to his arrival at the sheriff's office, had arranged to have vehicles similar to Robin Rowe's vehicle in the back lot, and Robin Rowe's vehicle was in the back lot. We walked him into the lot and asked him to look for vehicles that, or look and see if there were any vehicles that matched the description of the vehicle that he had seen in the subdivision on the morning of the fire. When he observed Robin Rowe's vehicle, he immediately pointed to that vehicle and stated that it was the same body style, same color, and resembled the car that he had seen. Sure.
The witness had placed a car similar to Robin Rowe's near the crime scene just a short while before fire consumed the duplex. Detectives still had to overcome a major obstacle. Robin's friend, Joan McHugh, had provided her with a solid alibi for the time of the homicides. Though police didn't think Joan was lying, they theorized that Robin had managed to slip out of the apartment undetected. Detective Gary Rainey was determined to find out.
I devised a scenario to try to prove or disprove Robin's presence in the apartment, and that was to have Joan confront Robin with the idea that she got up in the middle of the night, 3:30 in the morning, which was the time that we knew about when the fire started. That Joan would tell Robin that she came downstairs to get a drink of water, and Robin wasn't there.
When contacted, Joan McHugh agreed that the next time Robin called her from prison, she would tell her the false story and record the conversation. Joan was only too happy to cooperate.
I'm sure, I really shouldn't speak for Detective Rainey, but I'm sure that he believed that somewhere in the phone calls she would absolutely destroy all of her alibis. And I just knew that she was going to explain everything, and he was going to feel like a fool because she was innocent. There is no way a mother kills her children. And so I agreed to take the phone calls.
On the evening of February 20th, Robin called Joan from prison.
There's something that I have to talk to you about. That morning, I came downstairs. You weren't here, Robin. Where were you?
It wasn't the answer she expected. Robin repeated her story that at around 3:30 a.m., she was awakened by a strange premonition that something bad had happened to her family. But now, she added that she then contacted a psychiatrist and left the apartment to speak with her for over an hour. On tape, Robin had destroyed her alibi. Joan McHugh was devastated.
It was terrible. And I didn't know what to do after. It was on a tape recording. And it was like, do I call Gary or do I just take this thing and throw it in the trash and no one will ever know? But I wouldn't know. And it probably sounds dramatic, but Randy and the children deserve better than that. So I called Gary.
Police finally had enough evidence to charge Robin Rowe with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Based on the evidence, detectives believe that in the early morning hours of February 10th, Robin Rowe slipped out of her friend's house and returned to her own home. She turned off power to the smoke alarm. Then, driven by a twisted desire to cash in on her family's life insurance policies, she placed a pile of laundry near the air vents and set the deadly blaze. After murdering her husband and 2 children, Robin calmly returned to Joan McHugh's house to establish her alibi.
Psychological experts have described to me that it's simply a balance in her mind of what she personally is better off with, a husband and 2 children, or the proceeds of life insurance policies and the opportunity to move to a new state. And that she simply weighed those 2 things and decided that the money and the new life was what she wanted today.
Robin Rowe was convicted of arson and 3 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of her husband, Randy, and her 2 children. She was sentenced to death. Idaho police had to reconcile conflicting information to find the truth. In California, detectives must follow a complex maze in order to expose a murder. Known for its temperate climate and lush farmland, Yolo County, California offers a quiet, rural lifestyle, miles outside the state capital of Sacramento. But residents there are no strangers to tragedy. On the morning of February 5th, 1997, 911 dispatchers at the Yolo County Sheriff's Department received a call from a concerned mother. She feared that her son was missing. Deputies responded to the home. Patty Howard told the officer that she hadn't seen or heard from her 18-year-old son, Nick, since the previous evening. Patty said that the night before, Nick had helped her close up the auto body shop that the Howard family owned. As they were leaving, Nick said he had to retrieve a wallet he had left behind at a nearby restaurant. He told his mother he would be home in a couple of hours and said goodbye. But around midnight, Nick called and left a message on the answering machine. He said he was having car problems and was running late. But he never made it home that night. The family was very close, and it was completely out of character for Nick not to call and check in. Missing teenagers often turn up within a few days. But for Yolo County Detective Larry Cecchettini, Nick Howard didn't seem to fit the profile of a typical runaway.
This is probably one of the closest knit families that I've ever seen. And just from all indications, they were a very close, very loving family. For Nick to call and not come home was just something that had never happened before.
Investigators feared the teenager's car troubles had led to an accident. Police, friends, and family retraced his usual route. But after 2 days, the search had turned up nothing. Then, 2 men out on the search flagged down a patrol car near the banks of the Sacramento River. They had discovered tire tracks that led from the shoulder of the road down toward the riverbank.
Why do you think he's Nick? Figured nobody else would be laying those tracks down there. I don't know.
One of the men, 42-year-old Ralph Marcus, said he was a close friend of the Howard family.
Charles 22, I think we have a 972 that's coming up the foot. It starts dark.
Ralph said that he and his associate, Jake Stanton, were out looking for Nick when they came upon the tracks. Unsure if the discovery was related to Nick's disappearance, Detective Cecchettini was contacted. He knew that stretch of highway well, and the news was not encouraging.
This strip of roadway is a winding strip of river road. There are no guardrails on our county side. Quite frequently, inattentive or sleepy drivers do go into the river.
Search and rescue units from the Yolo County Sheriff's Department and officers from the California Highway Patrol responded to the scene. The team followed the tracks down an embankment. They led to the water's edge and then disappeared into the river. Members of the Yolo County Boat Patrol and rescue divers began scouring the river. After several hours of searching, divers signaled they had found something. 16 feet below the surface, they had discovered a vehicle resting on the riverbed. A tow truck pulled the car from the muddy river. The vehicle matched the description of the one driven by Nick Howard. A wallet recovered from the passenger seat contained the driver's license of the missing teenager. Examiners began searching the vehicle for clues. On the floorboard, they found Nick's prescription eyeglasses. They were bent, as if his head had violently impacted the dashboard or the steering wheel. Then, police noticed that a film of oil coated the vehicle's interior. It appeared to have come from an opened container of motor oil located in the back seat. The vehicle was towed to a police impound lot for a more thorough examination. Officers and divers from the boat patrol continued searching the area for any signs of Nick Howard. But there was no trace of the teenager. And if he was unconscious and not wearing his seatbelt when he went into the river, the powerful currents had likely carried his body miles away. With so many unanswered questions, police looked for clues to explain the accident. But aside from the tire tracks at the side of the road, little else was found.
Usually, if the vehicle went into the water at a high rate of speed, you're going to have a lot of broken rocks, you're going to have debris, possibly some skid marks, some significant physical evidence.
As the investigation continued, detectives received some unexpected information. Nick Howard's family had handed over some papers they found while going through his room. One was a life insurance policy in the teenager's name that was worth $850,000. There was also an uncompleted change of beneficiary form that listed Ralph Marcus, the man who had discovered the tire tracks at the river, as the new beneficiary. Police were surprised that someone as young as Nick Howard would have such a large insurance policy.
Essentially, he was spending a quarter of his monthly income on a life insurance policy, which struck us as odd. It's not something that life insurance just isn't something that an 18-year-old thinks about, especially when it costs that amount of money. I'll just see right there.
And that wasn't the only troubling news. An acquaintance of Nick Howard's came forward with information. He believed that Nick was alive and well. Recently, he said, the teenager had boasted that his life insurance policy would make him a millionaire.
Yeah, this big policy.
All he had to do was fake his own death, disappear, and then have Ralph Marcus collect on the policy. A polygraph test later confirmed he was telling the truth. The frantic search for a missing teenager had taken an unexpected turn. Now, investigators had to consider that Nick Howard had staged the auto accident and his own disappearance. To find out, police enlisted the aid of the California Highway Patrol's Accident Reconstruction Unit. Using the tire tracks found by the side of the road as his guide, investigator Steve Walker surveyed the scene. Detailed measurements indicated that the car had left the road at a 45-degree angle, and there was no evidence of vaulting or bouncing onto the shoulder. That suggested the car was traveling no faster than 14 miles per hour when it left the road. It was unlikely that a sleeping or inattentive driver had caused the vehicle to end up in the river. And there was no evidence suggesting that a collision had taken place.
There was no debris, there were no fluids stains on the roadway. There was nothing that you typically see in a traffic collision. It was very, very anomalous. And it likewise fit the idea that the car had not departed from the roadway in a violent manner, that it was set up to leave the roadway in a more controlled manner.
Police next examined the engine of Nick Howard's car, looking for any mechanical problems that could explain the accident. Almost immediately, they found a clue. A plastic bottle cap had been intentionally wedged into the engine's throttle, holding it open. And the cap had originated from the opened container of motor oil recovered from the vehicle's interior. With their suspicions raised, police turned to auto expert Charles Radford of the California Highway Patrol. To determine the significance of the findings, he conducted an experiment. He wedged the cap into the throttle of a car with a similar manual transmission engine. He put the car in gear and then turned on the ignition. The engine revved up to 6,000 RPMs and then lurched forward.
And we could get speeds in second as high as 20 miles an hour, and in fourth gear it was approximately 15 miles an hour within a 100 to 150 foot range. What this shows is that it would be very easy for someone to be able to take a car and put it in the river by use of an oil bottle cap.
All of the evidence police had gathered now led them to believe that 18-year-old Nick Howard had in fact staged his own disappearance. And now he was wanted for questioning in the elaborate insurance fraud scheme. But so far, all efforts to locate the teenager had turned up nothing. Police in Yolo County, California continued their search for 18-year-old Nick Howard. While looking for answers, they uncovered evidence suggesting the teenager and his friend, Ralph Marcus, had staged the disappearance. It appeared to be an elaborate scam to collect on a life insurance policy worth $850,000. But with Nick Howard's whereabouts uncertain, police turned their focus to Ralph Marcus, the beneficiary of the insurance policy. A background check on the 42-year-old heightened Detective Larry Cecchini's suspicions that the disappearance was in fact a hoax and that Ralph Marcus was somehow involved.
Ralph Marcus had done thefts, identity scams, insurance fraud, bankruptcy fraud. He was a drug runner.
Under questioning, Ralph Marcus denied any involvement in Nick's disappearance. And he knew nothing about any insurance scams.
Tell me about your relationship.
Ralph said he had been a friend of the Howard family for years. Nick was like a godson to him. He was shocked to learn that he was the beneficiary of Nick's life insurance policy. Ralph said he wasn't interested in the money. Police sensed he was lying. But with no hard evidence, they had no choice but to release him. The investigation was going nowhere. Then, on February 25th, 1997, 3 weeks after Nick Howard disappeared, Yolo County Police got a break. But it wasn't one they had expected. A man fishing on the Sacramento River had called police after discovering human remains. Less than a mile from where Nick Howard's car was found, police recovered the partially decomposed remains of a young man. The victim, found with a single glove on his right hand, matched the description of the missing teenager. And dental records later confirmed that Nick Howard had finally been found. With no obvious cause of death, the body was transported to the Yolo County Coroner's Office. There, forensic pathologist Dr. Brian Peterson began looking for answers.
Here's some pictures of the body that was found on scene.
A close examination of the glove and the clothing indicated that no traces of motor oil were present. And that suggested the victim was not in his car when it went into the water. For Detective Cecchettini, the findings didn't make sense.
A couple of things just didn't add up. For one, the body was wearing one glove, which we thought was somewhat unusual. I remembered that the car was coated with motor oil when we initially located it, but yet there were no traces of motor oil on the clothing. Granted, he'd been in the water for some time, but the traces of motor oil are not going to be entirely washed from the body.
Dr. Peterson next looked to establish a cause of death. Fluid found in the victim's lung suggested Nick Howard had drowned. But there was also something else.
Additionally, there were changes consistent with manual strangulation, bleeding inside the muscles of the neck.
Nick Howard had been murdered. For the Howard family and for investigators, the discovery was devastating. In addition to the tragic loss, it was now clear that Nick Howard had not staged his own disappearance. And Ralph Marcus was now the prime suspect in his death.
Now in the body, we pretty much determined that the body was not in the car when it went in. We have an $850,000 potential life insurance payout, and we have the beneficiary, and we're doing everything that we can to make sure that we get to the bottom line on this and get to the truth of what happened.
Police contacted the insurance agent in nearby Sacramento who handled Nick's policy. According to records, Nick came in a few weeks before he disappeared, requesting that Ralph Marcus be named the new beneficiary. But he didn't have all of the correct paperwork, and the change was not completed. But Nick didn't seem to understand, and the agent believed that he left that day convinced that his policy had in fact been updated.
In the insurance agent's opinion, when Nick left, he was under the impression that the change was completed and that Ralph Marcus was the beneficiary.
Though incriminating, the information fell short of the smoking gun investigators would need to prove murder. Then they got a break. A witness asked Detective Cecchettini to meet him at a pier on the Sacramento River. Jake Stanton, the man who was with Ralph Marcus when the tire tracks were discovered at the river, believed he had important information about the case. Jake said that shortly after Nick went missing, Ralph had asked for his help in searching for the teenager. While driving along the Sacramento River, Ralph pulled up to the pier. He said it was one of Nick's favorite spots. As they searched the area, Jake saw Ralph Marcus walk to the end of the pier toward a black glove.
As Jake turns around, he sees Ralph ditch the glove off the top of the pier. Before Jake even says anything, Ralph mentions to him, "I was trying to get the glove."
Detectives showed Jake the black glove recovered from Nick Howard's body. He was certain it was identical to the one Marcus had kicked off the pier.
Jake was adamant about the fact that Ralph was trying to kick the glove off so that it could not be recovered. The significance of this is that we had never told anybody that when Nick was found, he was wearing one glove.
The information brought police one step closer to proving that Ralph Marcus had murdered 18-year-old Nick Howard. But so far, all of the evidence was circumstantial. Police in Yolo County, California were now certain that 18-year-old Nick Howard had been murdered for his life insurance policy, worth $850,000. All of the evidence suggested that Ralph Marcus, the beneficiary of the policy, was responsible. The suspect was brought in for another interview. Police showed him the black glove that had been recovered from the victim. Though witnesses saw Marcus stick an identical glove into the Sacramento River, he claimed he hadn't seen one like it before. Marcus continued to insist that he had no knowledge of Nick's life insurance policy and was in no way involved in his death. He pointed to the fact that he had gone to great lengths to help find Nick after he disappeared. But detectives believed that Ralph Marcus had only done that in order to divert attention from himself. Authorities obtained a warrant to search the home Ralph Marcus shared with his mother. There, they found several documents relating to Nicholas Howard's insurance policy. And Marcus was in the process of filing a claim for the $850,000. The suspect was well aware of Nick's life insurance policy, something he had repeatedly denied. He was placed under arrest and charged with first-degree murder. Police believe that Ralph Marcus was able to get 18-year-old Nick Howard to agree to stage his own death after making him the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. But Marcus never intended to split up the money. Once the plan was in place, he beat and strangled the teenager, then tossed him into the river to die. After placing the teenager's wallet and glasses inside the vehicle, Marcus rigged the engine of Nick's car with an oil cap and sent the vehicle into the water, hoping his death would appear as an accident. Ralph Marcus was convicted of the first-degree murder of Nicholas Howard and sentenced to life in prison. Greed and self-interest can be strong motivations for murder. And when the killer is cunning, the truth can be elusive. But detectives and forensic scientists are dedicated to finding justice for unsuspecting victims who have found themselves betrayed. In Montana, a murdered woman is found stuffed in the trunk of her car. With little physical evidence to go on, investigators struggle to catch her killer. A seemingly healthy 33-year-old woman dies in her sleep. Tennessee police must determine if her death resulted from natural causes or murder. In Ohio, a woman abandons her husband and 2 children. But a routine investigation reveals that her disappearance may not have been intentional. A well-executed homicide can baffle even the most skilled investigator. But forensic examiners look beyond the obvious to find proof of a killer's guilt. and expose the elements of murder. Settled in the heart of Big Sky Country, the city of Great Falls, Montana is surrounded by the majestic Rocky Mountains to its west and the Little Belt Mountains to its east. On an October morning, a man hiking along the secluded banks of the Missouri River stumbled upon several ID cards. They belonged to a young woman. Concerned, he alerted police. Deputies from the Cascade County Sheriff's Department responded to the call. At the river's edge, they found additional ID cards belonging to the woman. Police were familiar with the name. 27-year-old Susan Galloway had been reported missing the previous day. Unsure what to make of the findings, officers from the boat patrol were called in to drag the river. 20 feet from shore, they signaled they had snagged a woman's purse. Inside were more of the missing woman's ID and credit cards. There was also $100 in cash. But there were no signs of Susan Galloway. Cascade County Police contacted the missing woman's parents and brought them in for an interview. The family was alarmed when they discovered that their daughter and her vehicle were gone. Susan had recently become engaged, and she seemed so happy. Her fiancé, Craig Smith, was stationed at the nearby Air Force Base. The couple often helped out at the business that the Galloways owned. Susan was a devout Mormon, and though Craig wasn't, he had agreed to convert so the two could marry. The family planned to give the couple ownership of the store as a wedding present. They couldn't understand why Susan would just take off without a word. Veteran detective Ken Anderson was not optimistic.
Well, finding the identification indicated that Susan Galloway did not, in fact, just leave town or drive away in her vehicle without saying goodbye and that sort of thing, because she certainly wouldn't have left her identification and money behind.
Police arranged to interview the missing woman's fiancé. Craig Smith had no idea where Susan could have gone. He last saw her the night before she disappeared. After leaving a dinner party, Susan dropped him off at his apartment around midnight. He hadn't heard from her since. The detective was curious about a bandage on Smith's hand. He explained that he had accidentally cut himself with a knife. A few hours after Susan dropped him off, he woke up thirsty. He tried to open a frozen can of orange juice, but was having trouble. He grabbed a knife, but it slipped as he tried to pry open the can. His car wasn't running, and he walked to the Air Force Base where he was stationed to have a medic treat the wound. Police later confirmed he had visited the medic that evening. The search for Susan Galloway was going nowhere. 3 days later, a power company employee working at the Rainbow Dam spotted something on a hill across the river. He decided to go check it out. When he arrived at the spot, he found a car that had plunged down the hillside. The vehicle appeared to be caught up on some brush. Police and crime scene technicians were contacted and responded to the scene. A check on the vehicle's tags revealed the car was registered to missing 27-year-old Susan Galloway. Sergeant Anderson made his way down the hill. Through the window, he observed a key in the ignition. There didn't appear to be anyone inside. But on the back of the vehicle, he noticed streaks of blood. There was also what appeared to be a footprint on the trunk. Then, Anderson took a closer look inside the car.
The rear cushion of the back seat had pulled away from the trunk area, and at that point in time, I could see a body inside the trunk of the car.
The woman matched the description of Susan Galloway, and it appeared she had been murdered. Police towed up the vehicle and began searching for clues. Inside the car, technicians found large blood smears on the front passenger seat. They also recovered several shards of broken green glass stained with blood. The exterior of the vehicle was thoroughly photographed. The victim's body was transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. The lack of evidence found near the car led police to believe that she had been murdered elsewhere and then brought to the hillside. A dog was brought in to track the victim's scent. A mile from the car, he alerted to a partially dug hole. More of the victim's blood was found. It appeared the suspect brought the woman to this spot, finished the kill, and then attempted to bury the victim. But for some reason, gave up. The medical examiner confirmed the victim was in fact Susan Galloway. Pieces of green glass from a 16-ounce soda bottle were found embedded in her skull and neck. They had severed her carotid artery, and as a result, Susan had bled to death. Now, detectives had to find out who had murdered Susan Galloway and why. But with few clues and no obvious suspects, they knew it would not be easy. Police in Great Falls, Montana had few clues in the murder of 27-year-old Susan Galloway. The young woman had been brutally beaten with a soda bottle, placed in the trunk of her car, and then sent down a steep embankment. No usable prints were found on the glass or in the victim's vehicle. Hoping to identify a suspect, investigators released details of the crime through the media. A short while later, they got a tip.
He knocked on my door.
A man stationed at the local Air Force base believed he had information.
Asked me,
Well, what time did he come to the room?
He said that on the night Susan disappeared, he had seen her fiancé, Craig Smith. Smith had come by the barracks in the early morning hours. He noticed his friend was carrying a bundle of dirty clothing. He also noticed a gash on Smith's hand. Smith told him he had cut it with a knife. He was on his way to see the medic for treatment and asked his friend for a ride home after that was done. Smith had also told the airman that he had been out drinking with friends and got stranded. In fact, he asked his friend to keep the story quiet because his fiancée, Susan Galloway, wouldn't have been happy about it. The airman's story contradicted Craig Smith's claim that on the night of the disappearance he had gone to bed soon after Susan had dropped him off. Sergeant Ken Anderson was suspicious.
It was almost as though Craig was lying about something, and all of a sudden he became the main suspect rather than the grieving fiancé.
Police looked to corroborate Smith's story. They located the medic who had bandaged his cut hand. He confirmed that Craig Smith had come in to be treated for a cut in the early morning hours of October 23rd. But the medic recalled thinking that the wound was consistent with having been caused by a jagged edge rather than a knife blade, as Smith suggested. Though incriminating, the information fell short of proving that Craig Smith was a killer. Now, looking to tie the suspect to the crime scene, police canvassed the nearby area. A clerk at a convenience store remembered seeing Smith and Susan Galloway the night she disappeared. And according to the clerk, they seemed to be arguing when they came into the store. They bought a few bottles of soda and then left. The clerk showed the officer the type of soda purchased by the couple. They were 16-ounce bottles made of green glass, identical to the glass that had killed Susan Galloway. The information was enough for police to obtain a warrant to search Craig Smith's residence. The suspect continued to deny any involvement in Susan's death. He admitted he and Susan had been in the convenience store that night. And he also admitted that in the past, he had hung out at the area where her car was later found. But Smith denied ever being at the spot where the partially dug hole was found. The place police believe was the kill site. Detectives collected the clothing he wore on the night of Susan's disappearance. But the items had been recently cleaned.
Is there a shirt in there also, Ken?
Police realized their only hope would be to link Smith to the sneaker print recovered from the trunk of Susan's car. They collected a single pair of muddy shoes. An examination revealed that the shoes seized from Craig Smith were the same size and the soles had the same pattern as those collected from the vehicle. But that alone wouldn't be enough to prove murder.
He had driven her car a number of times. His footprint was in a regular place on the trunk, but it could have been there.
Police would have to physically place him at the kill site. And all they had to do that was some dirt on the bottom of Smith's shoes.
And it was our belief that if he had been standing in the area of the kill site, he would have picked up soil. It was very sandy and totally different from the mud and soil at the area where the car was pushed over.
Investigators collected soil samples from various locations where the suspect claimed to have been on the night of Susan's disappearance. They also collected samples from the spot where they believed the murder took place. All of the soil was sent to the University of Montana for analysis. There, geologist and mineralogist Jack Warenberg worked the case.
I was to examine crime scene soils, and there was a open burial site, and there were several other small areas that they wanted to be checked out to compare the soil that was present on the suspect's shoe.
Warenberg observed that the soil samples taken from the bottom of Smith's shoe contained tiny pieces of glass, probably from broken bottles. A microscopic analysis also revealed that the sample contained bits of ash that were consistent with having been produced by copper. The samples collected from Craig Smith's yard and from the path he had walked to the base had no such ash. In fact, only samples taken from the crime scene had both the tiny shards of glass and the copper ash. And the reason seemed simple. A few hundred yards from the crime scene, on the banks of the Missouri River, was the site of a copper smelting plant. Warenberg determined that it was the only area in the county where copper ash appears in the soil. Craig Smith had been at the kill site, something he had previously denied. When confronted with the evidence against him, Craig Smith admitted to killing his fiancée. He said he wanted the Galloway family business, but had no interest in being married to Susan. He was charged with first-degree murder. Based on the information, police believe that on the night of the murder, the couple got into a heated argument. Then, Craig Smith viciously attacked his fiancée. He then dragged her to a secluded spot to finish the job and bury his victim. But when that didn't work, he placed her in the trunk of her car and attempted to send the vehicle over the cliff. Craig Smith was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 100 years in prison. A patch of soil was enough for Montana police to expose a killer's dirty secret. But in Tennessee, detectives must look beyond the obvious in order to find answers to explain a mysterious death. In the early morning of December 23, 1997, Nashville police and emergency workers responded to a frantic 911 call. Terry Robinson said his wife had been violently ill for several days, and now she wasn't breathing. She was pronounced dead at the scene. With no obvious cause of death, detectives were dispatched to the home as a matter of routine. Homicide detective E.J. Bernard was assigned the case. 33-year-old Lenora Robinson lay dead on the couple's bed. Investigators noticed a black substance on the woman's shirt and on the pillowcase that seemed to have come from the victim's mouth and nose. It didn't appear to be blood. Perhaps they thought it had originated from a cigarette found next to Lenora's bed. They also found and collected a bottle of Gatorade and a glass filled with the orange liquid. Terry Robinson told the detective that Lenora had been suffering from severe flu-like symptoms for the past 4 or 5 days. In fact, the day before, Terry had taken his wife to a doctor for treatment for a high fever and uncontrollable vomiting and diarrhea. The physician who examined Lenora diagnosed her with a bad case of the flu. He gave her an injection to relieve the symptoms and sent her home. Terry said that Lenora seemed better for a while, but that night her symptoms worsened. He tried to nurse her, giving her Gatorade and medications. But when he checked on her the following morning, she wasn't breathing. Though there were no signs suggesting foul play, police were troubled that someone as young as Lenora would die from the flu. Detective Bernard ordered that an autopsy be performed.
The initial assumption was that it was something to do with the flu or the shot, or possibly a heart attack, brain tumor, something totally unknown to the family members or anyone, medical personnel on the scene.
Her body was transported to the Tennessee State Medical Examiner's office located in Nashville. There, Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Bruce Levy performed the autopsy. The thick black substance that had come from Lenora Robinson's nose immediately caught his attention.
Well, in this case, the first thing was there had been noticed some black residue on the pillow next to where her mouth had been, which means that something had come out of her body. We weren't sure exactly what it was.
An internal examination uncovered evidence of a heart condition and congested lungs, supporting the idea that Lenora had died of natural causes. Then, Detective Bernard arrived to view the autopsy. He noticed something unusual.
It smells like almonds or candy.
It was the smell of bitter almonds coming from the body. It was an odor associated with people who have died as a result of cyanide poisoning. Further examination, however, failed to turn up the telltale signs associated with cyanide ingestion. There was no liver damage and no signs of burning in the mouth or esophagus. Toxicology tests on the Gatorade found near Lenora's bed turned up negative for poison. If the 33-year-old woman had been exposed to cyanide, the question now was how and by whom. An autopsy performed on 33-year-old Lenora Robinson led authorities in Nashville, Tennessee, to believe her death had resulted from exposure to cyanide. To prove it, additional tests would have to be performed. The medical examiner collected blood, tissue, and urine samples. The items were then forwarded to forensic toxicologists. To test for the presence of poison, the samples are mixed with chemicals that react to cyanide. If the poison is present, it will turn a bluish-purple color within a few minutes. The tissue samples turned up negative. But Lenora's blood and urine tested positive for the poison. For cyanide to be absorbed in the blood, but not in the tissue, it would have had to have been inhaled. And according to forensic expert Agent Louis Kuykendall, cyanide is most lethal in a mist-like state.
Typically, the person will have convulsions. The person will have stomach distress, but usually very quickly, 30 seconds to maybe 2 minutes, they're into a coma state and then die very rapidly.
Medical examiner Bruce Levy contacted police with the findings.
We have the results on the toxicology on Lenora Robinson. It is positive for cyanide.
But until police could rule out that the poisoning was accidental or suicide, the manner of death would remain undetermined. Detective E.J. Bernard was quickly able to rule out both of those scenarios.
There was no suicide notes. I learned that she would have died within minutes of ingesting the cyanide. Therefore, she would have left something close by. There was nothing close by. Mr. Robinson assured me that he did not clean anything up.
Police believed Lenora Robinson had been murdered. To find out why, they questioned the victim's mother and stepfather. Both agreed that the marriage had been rocky for some time. According to Lenore's mother, the couple suffered from severe financial problems. The small business that they owned and operated together was not doing well. And the bills continued to pile up. It had caused a lot of anger and resentment between Terry and Lenora. Lenora, they said, had recently begun talking about the possibility of divorce. They had one more piece of information to add. Terry, they said, had once worked as an exterminator, and as part of his job, he had worked with deadly poisons. Before obtaining a warrant to search Terry Robinson's home, police needed to know if it was possible for him to create cyanide vapor.
Pesticides, industrial pesticides especially.
Agent Kuykendall confirmed that the process is relatively simple.
You might go ahead and collect that.
He gave police a list of items to look out for. Armed with a warrant, police returned to Terry Robinson's home. The suspect maintained his innocence. But as Detective Bernard began sifting through the couple's financial papers, he uncovered a letter Lenora had written to her husband. In it, she threatened him with a bitter and costly divorce. With a list of chemicals that could be used to transform cyanide into vapor, Detective Bernard searched the suspect's garage. There, he found several common household items that could have been used. He also collected numerous containers of unidentified liquid. At the TBI crime lab, Agent Kuykendall began analyzing the substances collected from the home. But the results were not what investigators had hoped for.
Essentially what EJ found and sent to me, none of those had cyanide or enough cyanide at any level that if someone was to ingest it or get them on, that it should harm them.
The investigation was back to square one. To make their case, police would have to rely on the circumstantial evidence. And their best bet would be to prove that the suspect had access to cyanide. Detectives contacted Terry Robinson's former employer at the extermination company where he had worked years earlier.
I need your help.
The man confirmed that while Robinson worked there, the company utilized cyanide. In fact, Terry Robinson helped convert the crystallized poison into a liquid stick, which would then be administered with a mister to combat insects and rodents.
Oh, what's that smell?
The former employer hadn't seen Terry in some time and wasn't aware of any poison he may have taken with him when he left the company. Still, Detective E.J. Bernard refused to give up.
Thank you very much.
Well, I continued looking for the magic bean, we'll say, where I could get a receipt where he bought cyanide. I was unable to locate that.
Though police had established motive and opportunity, they had no hard evidence linking Terry Robinson to the poison that was used to murder his wife. And without that, Lenora's murder threatened to remain unsolved. Forensic toxicologists in Nashville, Tennessee, had exposed the poisoning death of 33-year-old Lenora Robinson as a homicide. But so far, they had been unable to link her husband, Terry Robinson, to the cyanide gas used to kill her. But then they got the break they needed. Lenore Robinson's great uncle came in to speak with police.
I believe your name is Boyd Blanton.
He recalled that some time ago, Terry had asked for his help in killing wasps that had nested near his home.
Did he pay you for this?
Good to see you. What you got here?
The uncle agreed and came by the house to give Terry several insecticides and poisons. Among the items were cyanide tablets. Though the evidence was circumstantial at best, police were able to obtain a warrant for the arrest of Terry Robinson. On June 30th, police returned to his home and took him into custody. Terry Robinson was charged with the first-degree murder of his wife, Lenora. Based on the evidence, police believe that Terry Robinson took advantage of Lenora's illness to free himself from an unhappy marriage, heavy debt, and an impending divorce. On December 22nd, he made his way into her bedroom and administered the deadly poison. On October 15, 1999, 49-year-old Terry Robinson was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 51 years in prison. To trap a killer and make their case, police in Nashville had to rely on both hard science and dogged determination. But some predators have an intimate knowledge of law enforcement tactics, and outwitting them can be a difficult challenge. With a population of less than 8,000 residents, Belpre, Ohio is regarded as a friendly, tight-knit community. And when someone goes missing, it's everyone's business. On September 19, 1996, Jack McCready came in to speak with Belpre police. Investigators knew him well. McCready was a respected officer with the Ohio State Police. And now he wanted to report that his wife Jennifer had disappeared. He said he last saw his wife that morning as they were getting ready to go to work. Jack said he hadn't noticed anything unusual about her behavior that morning. Though their marriage had its problems, he thought things had improved.
There you go. All right, I really got to.
He later learned that Jennifer never showed up to work that day. Jack suspected his wife had been having an affair, and now he feared she had taken off with another man, leaving him with the couple's 2 children. Detective Dave Garvey agreed.
When he got home, the first thing he saw was Jennifer's wedding band on the kitchen counter. He checked the house and found out that there were certain items of hers missing, luggage was missing, and photographs was missing.
Though police had no reason to suspect foul play, they agreed to look into the case. They began by questioning the McCrady's neighbors. One believed he had seen Jennifer leaving the house that morning. 10 a.m., he saw Jennifer's Blazer back out of the driveway and screech down the street in an erratic manner. The neighbor admitted that he never actually saw Jennifer's face.
Okay.
But he knew the Blazer was her car, and he had never seen anyone else drive it. Then, a few days later, police received a call that a vehicle matching Jennifer's Blazer had been located in a parking lot. Jack McCready was dispatched to the scene, and he confirmed that it was in fact his wife's car. Investigators searched the vehicle's interior. They found no obvious signs of a struggle or any indications of foul play. Still, the vehicle was impounded for a more thorough analysis. Crime scene technicians scoured the vehicle using luminol, a chemical that can detect invisible traces of blood and other biological evidence. But after hours of processing, the examination revealed nothing to suggest that a crime had taken place. As an adult, Jennifer McCready had the right to be missing. And having found no evidence that she had met with foul play, Belle Creek police had no choice but to give up on their search for the young mother of two. Detectives in Belpre, Ohio had found nothing to suggest that the missing wife of State Police Officer Jack McCready had met with foul play. All indications suggested the 30-year-old mother of two had simply packed up and left town. But then, friends of the missing woman contacted police. They were concerned something bad had happened to Jennifer McCready. Jennifer, they said, was dedicated to her children. They were her life. No one who knew her could believe that she would just walk out on her children. And no one believed she was having an affair, as Jack McCready suggested. But Jennifer had been talking about divorcing her possessive and jealous husband. Then, a witness came forward with information. She said that around the time of Jennifer's disappearance, she saw a police vehicle driving in a remote area a few miles outside of town. The officer fit the description of Jack McCready to a T. The woman had provided unreliable information in the past, and at first, Detective Dave Garvey didn't believe this would be any different. But when no additional leads surfaced, detectives decided to drive out to the secluded spot where the woman had seen the patrol car. There, they found something that seemed out of place. It was a dirt mound. They shoveled away a few inches of dirt and hit a vinyl cloth. That was followed by the unmistakable smell of death. Crime scene technicians were quickly dispatched to the scene. As the excavation continued, the team unearthed a comforter and a sleeping bag. And wrapped inside were decomposed remains, the head covered with a white plastic trash bag. When the bag was removed, one of the officers identified the female as Jennifer McCready. She was wearing pajamas. That was at odds with her husband's claim that when he last saw her, she was dressed and leaving for work. As a matter of routine, soil samples were collected from the makeshift grave. Technicians collected the bedding and the sleeping bag for a more detailed analysis. The victim was transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. The medical examiner determined that Jennifer McCready had died as a result of a gunshot wound to her head. The fatal .357 Magnum bullet was collected and sent to the crime lab. Belfry investigators now had a homicide on their hands. The inconsistent information, in addition to witness testimony, pointed to State Police Officer Jack McCready as the prime suspect. Detectives arranged to speak with him at the barracks where he was stationed. When they broke the news about Jennifer's death, he was visibly shaken. But as they began to question him, McCready asked for an attorney and ended the interview. Soon after, Jack McCready was put on leave. Investigators hoped the forensic evidence could tell them more. All of the items collected from the crime scene were sent to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Apprehension Lab for analysis. While processing the evidence, criminalist Michelle Yezo discovered dozens of synthetic fibers. She also located strands of fiberglass clinging to the inside of the sleeping bag.
Finding the fiberglass insulation within that sleeping bag was something that was very unusual in my opinion because that would be very itchy. And because of that, that's not something that you would want to have in that sort of context.
Police obtained a warrant to search the McCready home. In the bedroom, they found linens that matched the comforter the victim had been buried in. Several fibers were also collected for comparison with those recovered from the crime scene. In the kitchen, police located a .357 Magnum revolver, the same type of gun used to kill Jennifer McCready. As the search continued, investigators found and collected newly installed fiberglass insulation in the couple's garage. The material appeared identical to the insulation found in the sleeping bag. Then they noticed another potential clue. There were numerous shovels, and some were coated with dirt. Though McCready explained that he had recently done work on his yard, police confiscated the tools. Now, forensic examiners began analyzing all of the evidence. Michelle Yezo found that the carpet fibers collected from the McCready home shared all the same microscopic characteristics as those recovered from the bedding that the victim had been buried in. All of the evidence suggests that the victim was murdered in her own home. But none of it told them who had carried out the homicide. And their best chance of linking Jack McCready to the murder turned out to be a dead end. The gun barrel had been bored out, making ballistic comparisons nearly impossible. Police had underestimated Jack McCready.
I don't see anything in that.
The suspect had been clever enough to tamper with the one piece of evidence that could directly tie him to the murder. Or so he thought. Police contacted Richard Bisbing, a forensic microscopist with the private firm of McCrone Associates. He was asked to compare soil samples that were collected from the gravesite Jack McCrady's shovel, and from the suspect's yard.
We analyzed soil samples by doing a side-by-side careful comparison of all the details that we could find in the soil itself. The soil differs by color and by the presence of plant material. It differs by its mineral content. It differs by its texture, the particle sizes in the soil grains themselves. And all of those features are compared.
Bisbing began his analysis by comparing the soil taken from McCrady's shovel to samples taken from his yard. But the texture, size, color, and mineral composition of the two samples did not match. But when he compared the soil from the gravesite with the soil taken from the shovel, he found one consistency after another.
We could conclude that the soil from the shovel was similar to the gravesite and could have originated from the gravesite. And we were able to show that the place of the gravesite was different in its soil classification, even from the place where the defendant lived, and the soil was different than most places in the county.
A short while later, Ohio State Police Officer Jack McCrady was placed under arrest and charged with the murder of his wife, Jennifer. Though police remain unsure what drove him to murder, the evidence suggests that on the evening of September 18th, Jack McCrady shot Jennifer one time in the head. To cover up his actions, he buried her in a remote spot, returned home, and altered the barrel of his gun. Despite his efforts, Jack McCrady was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Some killers will go to extraordinary lengths to distance themselves from their deeds.